through neutral, but fault currents can be returned through earth. So that's why we have earth there. Simple left-hand diagram, which all of us we know, that if a person touches a live conductor in the earth system, where neutral is earth and he is also standing on earth, a human standing on earth, if it touches electrical live part inside the system, he offers a parallel path for the current. The live part could be a part intended to carry current. Suppose he is working on a panel. If he opens the panel, then maybe he can, there is a possibility that he will touch a live part which is conducting electricity, or he may touch a part which has accidentally become live, maybe because of insulation failure or whatever. So these are the possibilities in case of electrical shock. Another fact about electrical shock is the body resistance of a dry human male is about 1600 ohms, and 30 milliamperes through a human body can produce a fatal shock. So about 48 to 50 volts are enough for producing a fatal shock. If we believe in this theory, the question whether you get a shock because of voltage or because of current actually ends here. When you get a shock, definitely because of current, and there is a possibility that you can get even shock even from a 50 volt supply, provided that 50 volts is capable to drive 30 milliamperes through 1600 ohms resistance. I mean, the source capacity comes into picture there. If the source is strong enough, definitely you can get a shock even at 50 volts as well. The passage of electrical current through human body has two effects. First effect is affected muscles do not respond to orders from nervous system, that is orders from brain. We normally say that the person gets stuck to the conductor when he is experiencing a shock, but actually the factually or medically, if you look at the scenario, he is not able to remove his hands from the conductor because his nervous system gets affected because of that current. That's the reason he doesn't come out of that holding the conductor situation. And the affected muscles, they also have resistance, current is passing through them, so I square R loss happens in the muscles and muscles start burning. So heat produced can burn those muscles. So these are actually effects of a electrical shock when the person gets shocked. Another hazard which we discussed was electrical sparking, right? So whenever two electrical conductors with different potential touch each other intermittently, sparking is observed. We know this phenomenon. If fire load is close to vicinity, I hope all of us we know what is a fire load. Fire load is a material which can catch fire easily. Most of our LT rooms and most of our panel rooms, normally when we conduct audits, we find that they are, stuffed with the material which is absolutely not connected with electrical engineering. So if this concentration is more and if there is sparking, then this that material is known as fire load. It can catch fire, and then a normal sparking also can get converted into a large fire incidence. Generally, people say that newspaper articles say that fire happens because of short circuit. So these kind of things can happen when there is a huge fire load stored. So all regulations say that nothing the things which are not related to electrical engineering should not be stored in panel rooms. We'll come to them later on. But this is a simple way of another hazard, which is electrical sparking. Second is flashover. Actually, there was a survey done in the world around during around 2000 or maybe between 1995 and 2000, where the Western world found out that about 70% of deaths occurring due to electrical accidents are generally because of flashover rather than shock. Because a person, when he is attending a electrical panel installation or whatever connected with electricity, he knows, even if he is a person with not highly educated, he knows that there is a shock hazard. So he tries to take maximum precautions against shock, but he will never know whether any flashover is going to happen in the panel, because flashover is a sheer accident inside the panel. Maybe he can touch two live parts with a tool in his hand or something like that. Because of that, flashover happens. So what is flashover? Whenever electrical arc jumps from one conductor to another and probably has enough energy, and because of that energy, it sustains due to ionization of air column in between. An arc is said to be established. So because of high energy in initial jump, If the air gets ionized between these two conductors, then the arc is established. The situation is something like arc welding. Whatever happens in arc welding, same thing happens here. All of us know that arc welding transformer generally is of only 25 or 30 kVA rating. This is also large I am talking about. It could be even 10 kVA, it could be even 5 kVA as well. Where what you normally do is you drop down 440 volts to 24 volts, and the welder creates a spark between job and the electrode, and then lifts the electrode so that the arc is established. So whenever the arc is established, air gets converted into what we know as plasma, and plasma is basically has a very high temperature in which metals can melt. Something similar happens here when arc is established, and under that plasma, high temperature plasma, copper, silver, galvanized iron, whatever comes in the way, directly gets converted into gas. I mean, it doesn't even, you cannot even see the liquid form of it because the energy is so huge. 2.5 MVA, 3 MVA, 5 MVA transformer secondary, it gets short circuited through such established arc. A lot of energy is released there, and the metals directly get converted into gas. Now, these expansion ratios from solid to gas, as far as these two, three typical metals are concerned, which we use in electricity, electrical panels, its the expansion ratio is huge. It is beyond 10,000 or 6,000 to 10,000. So the panels, if they are in a very confined space and they are, if such flashovers happen there, there is a possibility that the panels explode, and that explosion is actually known as flashover. Such flashovers generally, create heavy pressure, large amount of light and sound, and splash of sharp metal splinters. This also happens, and all this becomes very dangerous, and this can damage human in so many ways. It can damage property. So many things can happen if we allow this to happen in a fairly large electrical infrastructure. Because it may not happen at residential level, but it can definitely happen in a industrial level where maybe 500-600 kVA upwards transformers are installed and not maintained and conditioned properly, designed properly to avoid this kind of flashover. So this is something related to flashover. Overheating, all of us we know it can happen because of undercapacity, it can happen because of overloading, it can happen because of harmonic currents, it can happen because of short circuit. Cable transformer busbar overheating due to reasons as in ABC above should be avoided by proper capacity selection. Short circuit is a condition when two conductors of unequal potential, which are not supposed to touch each other, touch accidentally, and huge current limited only by source impedance flows through the circuit. So this is a rough, summary of physics behind electrical shocks. Now let us see a live example of how much more heat is generated under these conditions. The left figure which you see is a normal 2 MVA transformer, let's say running with about 1800 kVA load. The HT side current will be about 47 amperes. LT side current will be about 2427 amperes in this case. Now in this condition, if let us say a short circuit happens at this bus 2, immediately your currents go to 13.122 kA. You can see 47.8 amperes versus 13,122 amperes. Similarly, 2427 amperes go to 43,411 kiloamperes. We all know that the heat produced is proportional to I square. If you do these calculations, 43,411 divided by 2427 and square it, then you will see that the heat produced is 300 times more under a short circuit. Now, this is a very dangerous situation. Even if I square T is what actually the energy content in that short circuit, even if the T is in milliseconds, if the heat generated is 300 times, then the whole infrastructure is under pressure or under, it can damage. It can damage because of this high amount of heat if it is not, if the fault is not cleared properly. So all these breakers which you can see here, this is a breaker on secondary side, this is a breaker on primary side. First, if I create a fault here, this should trip. If this doesn't trip, this has to trip. All that has to happen. If it doesn't happen, there will be a problem. Now let us come to third figure. In the same scenario, instead of a bolted fault, what we say in the bolted fault is a technical term which actually means two conductors physically get connected to each other. And the arc fault, as we saw in the last previous discussion, that it is actually not physical connection, but there is an arc in between. So our ionized air column has some resistance. So the current is not, it doesn't rise up to 43 K. It probably can go up to 25 K. Again, 25 K is much more than 2427 amperes. So the heat generated is more, and because of plasma, the temperatures are quite excessive. So these probably can give you a rough idea about what happens under these three typical conditions. I'm not considering overload here, basically because let us assume that things are designed properly. So they will never experience a sustained overload. But these right side two things definitely can happen if you don't do it, don't take proper precautions. They are anyway going to happen, but you will have to arrange the situation in such a way that the circuits are cleared, faults are cleared well in time so that they don't create further damage. Okay. Bolted and arc fault situations, again I have just repeated this here, that heat produced is about 300 times. The faults could be line to line, line to line to line, line to ground, line to line to ground, but bolted fault system can sustain for a design time and then you have to disconnect it. In arcing fault, sustained plasma due to ionization of air creates huge temperatures, busbar evaporate and create gases which are several times more in volume, and because of that the damage occurs. Now we can just see a arc flash analysis of the same scenario, 25.182 K if the current flows. There is a standard which we'll come to in later slides, which has given the formulae for converting a voltage fault current to arc fault current, and calculating energy depending upon geometry of the feeder. I mean, how you have arranged your bus bars, what is the total space available, what is the distance between earth part of the feeder and live part of the feeder. All that data you have to feed in the software, and then it gives you this. Now in this particular case, you can see that incident energy at this bus bar will be about 2.129 calorie per cm square. Now incident energy due to arc at 1.2 calories per meter square is considered as reasonably safe, as it can produce recoverable burns. 1.2 calories per cm square is not going to leave you as it is, but at least you will get some reasonable recoverable burns. So distance from source of the arc at which the incident energy level drops to 1.2 calorie per meter square is generally known as arc flash boundary. So if you know the arc incident energy, this incident energy is what? Basically, it's a function of, as I said, geometry of this panel, then line capacity, then impedance of your transformer, maybe impedance of cables in between. All this has to be analyzed, and then you get these fault currents and what kind of now whatever breakers I have coordinated here, it tells you that 50 milliseconds they are going to disconnect the circuit. So this 2.129 calorie per cm square has to be sustained for 50 milliseconds by this panel. Only then things will remain safe. Otherwise, you'll have to reduce this energy. How to reduce this energy? There are various ways. You can either, if you cannot reduce the current, you try to have a sophisticated tripping mechanism here with external relays and all, which can reduce the time. Even that is also possible. Or if it's a greenfield project, if you are designing a project, maybe if the voltage drops are permissible, one can go for a slightly higher resistor percentage impedance of the transformer, so that short circuit current can be reduced. There are various ways which will come to later when we actually go for arc flash analysis. But this is just to give you an idea. Now, standards and regulations related to electrical safety. Let us see what they are and how they have come up. Electrical accidents in industry could result into death, loss of limb, permanent disability, etc. As such, various countries impose statutory regulations on use and maintenance of electricity. So they have to be in place. Otherwise, an employer-employee relationship or a vendor-customer relationship, ultimately there has to be a infrastructure, which will decide responsibility of a person under. Even if we take all the cares, there is always a probability that an accident will happen. So some rules and regulations have to be there to govern them. Under such situations, when somebody thinks about coming out with statutory regulations, lot of technical institutes, voluntary institutes in the world like IEC, IEEE, NFPA, India in case of India, IS, have come out with good working practices in the form of standards. These standards are actually guidelines for which come out of a lot of experimentation and experience of the working committees who are attached with these institutes, and legal framework adopts these standards ultimately, and then they are converted into kind of a law, and then things happen. So AC electrical circuit analysis involves complex vector calculations. We all know that. In fact, we fear mathematics involved during our education days, and after that we always, because of that fear, we intend to use thumb rules, and at times you may have the problem because of using thumb rules. But these complex vector calculations ultimately have to be done for optimizing the situation. And fortunately, these days, softwares and computer is always there at our help. So one doesn't have to break his head much for doing those calculations, but they are possible to do. These institutes, especially those from Western world, have well-equipped laboratories to actually create fault conditions. So they create these conditions, they observe the results, and then they make these standards. Many of the times they have to come out with what we in engineering we call as empirical formulae. I mean, there may not be a science proven formula for calculating, let's say, incidental energy or something like that, but through their experience and whatever they do in their laboratories, they come out with empirical formulae which can be used for such calculations. Based on these experiments, they come out with procedures to analyze electrical systems for load flow, short circuit, arc flash, etc., and then decide acceptable working practices to limit fault energy so that damage under fault can be minimized. This is the reason we should adopt all these. I mean, we should know the standards and we should try to follow them continuously. This is a brief list of standards which are connected to electrical engineering. CA 2010 is the electrical safety guideline, Government of India. We'll come to know about legal infrastructure in India as far as electricity is concerned in next slide. But CA 2010 is what is supposed to be, as amended, of course, to be related for electrical safety. IS 732 is another standard in switchgear coordination, which is again Government of India standard. CA 2010 in fact says that whenever user feels that the statement in CA 2010 is insufficient to cover a particular situation, a relevant IS is supposed to be referred. So 732 is also equally important. IS 3043 is our system and equipment earthing standard in India. IS/IEC 62305 is a lightning protection system, again Government of India. Always use, henceforth you will keep seeing IS/IEC because recently Indian Standard Institute has come with an agreement with IEC that IEC standards can be adopted as it is in India. So the standards will be called IS/IEC, and the same standard will become applicable for in India as well. So most of the standards henceforth will come as IS/IEC. Supply code 2005 is a connectivity requirement. This particular name is from MSEDCL, but it will be different in different states of India. But this is a connectivity requirement. Again, when we talk about connectivity requirements, all of us, we should understand that electricity is use of electricity is a completely connected system. Part of it is wired connected system. It is not a wireless system. So anything we do here actually has to come from a utility infrastructure, and for their safety, their utilization, their commercial aspects, there has to be a legal framework as to if the electricity is made available, how one should use it. So all that is covered under Supply Code 2005. We have IEEE 51992, or maybe latest standard is 2014 version of it, which is current voltage harmonic compliance. The NFPA 70E is an American standard, National Fire Protection Association. It talks about electrical safety at workplace. So whatever is given there probably can be used for electrical safety. NBC, NACA are electrical National Building Code and National Electricity Codes in India. Unfortunately, in India, codes are all non-mandatory. I mean, the first line in the code book, what is written is this is not a mandatory code. All of us as consultants and maybe sensitive people as far as safety and other stuff is concerned, we do not understand why that sentence is there, but it is there. So NBC, NAC are existing. It is very well written. If we follow them while designing a project, most of the safety things are taken care of. So many consultants have already started using this also. I mean, they specify in their tenders that NBC clause number so and so should be followed and all that. So it helps. ISIC 61439, this is a new standard which has come up. We are going to discuss in subsequent slides in detail. It's a low voltage switchgear and control gear assembly standard. Till recently, we used to have certified switchgears, but any electrical control panel, if you see, basically it's a system integration. You take 4 or 5 different components, maybe from different manufacturers, and put them together into a panel, and then that is supposed to give you safety, reliability, and whatnot. So now this standard talks about how one should achieve that. So that is also one of the standards which is related to safety. IEC 60909, this is a short circuit calculation procedure. So that is also needs to be followed. IEEE 1584 is a arc flash energy calculation procedure. These are few of the standards which are related to electrical safety and will be quite referred to when one tries to practice good governance for electrical safety. So legal framework in India, as of now, we have Electricity Act 2003, which is amended time and again, but the act basic is this act. Central Electricity Authority, that is CEA, was formed as an autonomous body under Electricity Act 2003, and that comes out with safety guidelines. Supply code and grid codes are created in every state, again as guided by CEA. Electrical Inspectorate works under State Energy Ministry, at least in Maharashtra. Other states, the reporting authority may be different, but Electrical Inspectorate still exists everywhere. Statewide offices of Electrical Inspectorate are there. We know the offices are there. They have to approve new connections technically, not from availability of the supply, but technically they are expected to approve them and keep periodic watch on existing installations for safety. Here the infrastructure drastically fails because number of inspectors and the staff available with them and number of establishments in India, it's absolutely disproportionate. So visiting every establishment every year is virtually not possible with the number which they have with them. Most of the time, statutory authorities get involved only for investigating accidents in learning establishments. All the statutory compliance is checked during accident investigation. So why one should follow this? Because if we'll pray to God that nothing will happen in your establishment. But if at all it happens anytime, maybe because of fault of the operator, still it will be investigated. And at that time, all compliances are definitely checked because one has to ascertain the responsibility of the accident on somebody. So it's good to follow them. Non-mandatory codes like, as I said, NBC, NEC are there. Various test labs are available in India for type testing certification. So type tested products are available, and Indian test labs are probably recognized in many of even Middle East countries as well. So whatever they test there is acceptable to Middle East countries at least. When we say Middle East countries, probably or unknowingly Europeans also have accepted certification of these standards. We have all this infrastructure existing. Implementation, as I said, is a big issue due to very large number of establishments. But legal framework is something like this. So as per CA 2010, the owner or occupier of a premises receiving a formal connection is responsible for safe use of electricity, largely applicable to establishments with more than 250 kilowatt load. So owner or occupier of a premises, declared as owner or occupier. Owner maybe legally, if he is a company, a privately limited company, he can delegate these duties. Owner may not be directly related, but CA 2010 says it is his responsibility. Owner or occupier is what is expected to do. know his legal responsibilities related to safe use of electricity. You should know what are his responsibilities. Get the electrical system designed, approved, and installed from a legally as well as technically competent person and as specified in CA 2010 and relevant I standards. Maintain the system in good and safe operating condition with periodic preventive and predictive maintenance. Appoint a qualified electrical safety officer who should self-declare the electrical safety of the establishment once a year by filling required forms after internal inspection and keep it on record. Now, standard as CA 2010 has defined duties of this electrical safety officer. They have also defined what he should know, what are his qualifications, what must be his experience. Will not go into details. Those who are interested probably can download CA 2010 from CA website or just drop us a mail. We'll send a copy to you. But all these details are there. The procedure, as it is drafted there, says that the establishment has to assign an electrical safety officer, and then he has to report to electrical inspector. And electrical inspector, after taking his interview, will decide whether he is capable of doing it or not. At least to my knowledge, this has not happened in Maharashtra so far anywhere. All of you are in industry, so few of you might be knowing as well. I have seen few companies receiving a notice that please declare your self electrical safety officer. But the concept is quite good. That one person should be made responsible for electrical safety in the plant, and who should be qualified electrical person. He cannot be anybody else. The maintenance is expected to be carried out by authorized, qualified, and trained personnel deputed by licensed contractors certified by electrical inspector. Now, in India, this concept exists. Licensed contractors are being given licenses who can do work in a prescribed manner, and they are supposed to declare that their work is safe. This licensing procedure does exist in India. So under CA 2010, you are expected to get the work done only through licensed contractors and not from any other electrician or electrical executing firm or whatever. The owner is expected to keep up-to-date electrical documentation of the system and display it near the equipment for easy reference during emergency. Electrical, now I'll just try to elaborate an example on this. Documentation means exact SLDs and BOQs of all your electrical establishment. Whenever we audit, not always, but at one place we had experienced this, that there was a LT distribution panel with the arrangement for DG also in the same panel. And there were two breakers, one for transformer, another for DG breaker, and they were supposed to be mechanically interlocked to each other. When we audited, we saw that the physical interlock was not existing at all. When we asked, they made us to contact their contractor and all that. When we did, he said नहीं साहब वो ऑर्डर किया था लेकिन वो जल्दी में आया नहीं, तो अभी 1.5 साल हो गया और लगाना बाकी है. So actually, transferring from MSEB to DG was dependent only on the sincerity of the operator. So such things do happen. Another thing is there is a trend these days in industries that all of us we go for facility management teams or external agencies who maintain our electrical infrastructure. So there is a possibility that the person from their side can change from one tent to another. This is possible. They can give you a competent person, but who doesn't know much about your own establishment. So good and reliable documentation, if it is ready. CA 2010 insists that you should have a documentation, and if the inspector comes, even if he points a particular breaker, your person should be able to tell that what that breaker does, what are the interlocks on that breaker, how it is coordinated. All those questions he is expected to answer. So documentation is also one of the major this thing which is required. A trend in Indian industry at present is most of the time we go for documentation in AutoCAD, right? As an electrical engineer, I personally feel that AutoCAD is a picture for electrical engineer. It doesn't give you any electrical details. It is just a drawn picture. Instead of that, if you have documentation done from this electrical system simulation software, you get an intelligent documentation, which actually helps you in having all electrical parameters automatically calculated and marked on those drawings, which can definitely help you when operating those panels and maintaining them. So such documentation is very common in all Western countries. In India, as of now, project documentation itself comes in AutoCAD. So there is a trend to continue that in AutoCAD. And in many companies, we find that good draftsmen are not accessible to electrical team. So either the any enthusiastic person may create a version of the drawing in Excel or work with that. So electrical system simulation can create what we call as a digital twin of the working system and perform load flow, short circuit, relay coordination, arc flash, everything on it. And the drawings can be made available and the record also can be kept. Such software undertakes all vector calculations related to system performance and does capacity calculation as per applicable standards. Availability of such accurate information about system gives more confidence about safe operation. So such documentation, if we go in for it, it always helps. I just tried to give you an example. I mean, this left side is the same circuit which we were talking about. Let's assume that this is the only thing which is planned. Your actual SLDs could be even bigger. They also can be simulated. So left side on the same diagram, you can see that you have all load figures. How many kilowatts and how many kVA are required at each point. Maybe your electrician talks in terms of current. So same diagram can, I mean, with a flick of a mouse, I can display currents on it. So this kind of a diagram can be referred by your electricians. If you look at the third drawing, again, they are all short circuit currents. All cables and transformers and whatever I have used here, whatever breakers I have used here, these kind of softwares normally have a huge library of actual electrical components. So I don't have to say CB1. If CB1 is Siemens so and so, I can go and select that particular breaker from the software and a BOQ can be auto-generated. So that I don't have to again enter these components into an Excel sheet and depend on enthusiasm and sincerity of the person who is doing it. Such kind of documentation is very, very common in all Western countries. These days, it is possible in affordable price even in India. So one can go for such documentation if he is really serious about safety. As per latest amendments in CA 2010, electrical safety officer qualifications and minimum required knowledge criteria are now specified. A new concept of government certified chartered electrical safety engineer is also introduced. This is introduced. CA says that states should appoint electrical chartered safety engineers. Unfortunately, what has happened is again CA has specified some syllabus for these electrical chartered safety engineers, and states are expected to conduct examinations for these chartered safety engineers, and then they will be certified as chartered safety engineers from authorized by government. Now, none of the states have so far, created an infrastructure in which these examinations on various other forums like our consultant association. We tried to represent our case with the inspectorate that if you have a qualified electrical engineer with 10 years experience whose degree is given by a known university from India, why do you need another examination? But anyway, they want it. So as of now, it states there. Another thing which has happened is they have actually even specified the audit fees in their notification, which I don't know why they have done it. And let's not get into those details. If anybody is interested, can refer to that this thing. But although it is provided now, I'm doubtful how effective that functioning would be. In developed countries, the concept of PE, professional engineer, exists. I mean, after your graduation, if you have to practice in electrical engineering, you have to give another exam. And just like our chartered engineers and company secretaries have a government registration number, and doctors also have government registration number. Similarly, an engineer also gets a registration number, and then he is expected to work in that state. So any let us limit our discussion to electrical engineering. So a certified electrical engineer who is known as PE only can design and sign an electrical circuit for execution. So this is the case which is in other countries. And then he becomes responsible for the performance of the system right from design stage till commissioning and maybe later on also. So unfortunately, this kind of system does not exist in India. Contractors in India have legal status, but designers don't. Even if we are graduate engineers, even if we have experience, we just have to go by our reputation in the market and get clients and do the design work. Yeah, we don't have any government regulation. Neither the government insists on a registration for a good design engineer. But this is the situation as of now. Now, typically in India, there is a very little dialogue between process team. And let's talk about some reasons why electrically unsafe situations are created. Typically in India, there is a very little dialogue between process team and electrical design teams at greenfield project level. This results into overcapacity designs. Overcapacities are not always safe. We generally see that we get only a small, Excel-based load list. And if we are not curious enough as electrical system designers, nobody tells us that how much will be percentage loading on those transformers or other those motors and all from load side. So unless that is known, generally the switch gears are selected for maximum ratings, and then it becomes very difficult to design the production system because we do not know under what duty it is going to operate. So there should be some dialogue between process team and electrical design before making initial design drawings. If they are not done, then they are all over capacity designs, and they may not always provide you protection. Culture of electrical system simulation and creating a digital twin is yet to establish in design stage in India. Most of the designs are based on thumb rules or approximate Excel sheets. Cable designs are very rarely, designers are very rarely involved in plant commissioning. If you see in Western countries or even in Middle East countries, the electrical system designer is involved in the system till it is commissioned. So he has to always get involved and see that whatever he has designed functions correctly. Breakers, relays, releases are equipped with facilities which can fit in available budget. So if I do not know exact operation of the plant and if I am not required to know, I provide whatever is maximum. In design stage, I may provide so many things, but ultimately what gets purchased is what fits into the budget. So it can happen that basic design philosophy may not percolate till actual commissioning, and the systems can become unsafe. Heat generated is a major issue which needs to be handled for safe operation of electrical system. So this is also important. Electrical systems are largely tolerant and sustain abnormal working conditions for more time, as such are neglected for considerable time. This is also one of the reasons. Abnormal production uptime pressures. I mean, these days, for last 8 to 10 years at least, I have observed that as a third party, if you go and see operation in that particular organization, you do not feel that there is a pressure on production or whatever. But most of the time, unnatural pressures are prevailing in the industries, wherein downtimes required for preventive, predictive maintenance are not allowed. We have seen people where plants are not shut even for 3 to 4 years. Whereas when we come across American or Western companies working in India who work in financial sector, which is equally or if not more sensitive, they also give 48-hour shutdown every 6 months for testing electrical safety and electrical equipment, and they get them certified so that it works reliably later on as well. So these pressures also are one of the reasons electrically unsafe situations exist. Electrical equipment are used beyond their life expectancy at many places. We have seen establishments for 20, 30 years continuously without any, I mean, the technology has changed, so many spares are not available, still same equipment is carried. This is also another reason. Overconfident and unqualified manpower used for electrical maintenance. All of us will know this. These are some of the reasons which can create an unsafe situation. It is very clear that the damaging heat produced in the system components is proportional to I square T. We all know that it is proportional to I square T. Transformer, cable, busbar, circuit breaker, and loads have defined thermal curves. If you see this curve, it is actually I square T curve. Maybe this particular thing is for a transformer, but it can be for any other electrical equipment. This portion of the curve, if you see, it is a safe zone of operation, whereas this portion of the curve is unsafe for the operation. Any particular current, if you see, suppose you want to pass this much of current, the equipment can sustain for this much of time. These are typical thermal characteristics of the transformer. Transformer has to be used in hashed portion of the curve for the current values. More the current, lesser the time transformer can sustain. Typically, this develops on proper relay setting. I mean, depends on proper relay setting. You will have to have a proper relay set for tripping the transformer supply if it is exceeding either current or time. In both cases, it has to be discontinued. So such curves are available. They can be incorporated into softwares, and very precise settings can be done, and optimization also can be done. Let me tell you with my somewhat experience in out of India also, that very little if you spend on these precise designs, maybe more than that you can recover at the design stage itself, because optimization you can do very confidently if your calculations are correct, and that optimization pays for these sophisticated design techniques rather than depending on normal thumb rules or approximate calculations. The importance of relay coordination and reliability of fault this thing on the trip circuit. Transformer, cable, panel bus bar, CTPT on bus bar, protection relays, built-in release, trip circuit supervision relays, master trip relays, panel circuit breakers with disconnectors, and coordination of backup last mile and most upstream. All these are components of a relay coordination or a protection system. So all of them needs a periodic checking, calibration, testing, and breaker servicing must be done to ensure actual protection when the fault occurs. Fault currents at various levels in distribution must be known. See, all these things, most of the time when we visit industries, people say that we regularly we get our breakers serviced. Now, breaker servicing actually ensures that the breaker mechanism is working, nothing more than that. So that breaker has to get a trip signal, which should be, which should come from a calibrated CTPT and a calibrated relay, and the whole mechanism also has to work. So while testing of the whole mechanism from primary injection or secondary injection, all that becomes important. So you should know the critical area of your plant, and these settings need to be checked every 5-6 months, or at least once in a year, so that you know that you are safe. See, these softwares can probably offer you so precise tables for setting of your relays. Now, this particular table talks about CB1, Relay 1, CB7, because I have not selected this component, but if I select them, so many columns are added in between where it says make, model, and which curve you have used and what type of setting you have done, which setting is set at what. All those reports can be generated, and coordination also can be done very easily. I mean, instead of doing any calculation, these kind of softwares give their TCC curves directly on screen, and you can move those curves for doing coordination. That is possible. So simulation software has device libraries and can do relay coordination and print setting tables. Such tables, if you give for the people who maintain your relays and breakers, then you have a base for why you are doing what, and then the safety can definitely be ensured. Now let us come to some safe manufacturing practices for LV switchgear. See, this ISIC 61439 was introduced about 3-4 years back, but now it has started becoming popular even in India. We have so many system houses of leading switchgear manufacturers getting certified for 61439 now. There are about 13 different tests which a manufacturer has to conduct on each rating of the feeder. I mean, suppose I get it certified for a 5 HP starter or isolator and 100 HP starter or isolator, things like that. I mean, you have to predict that, and all those feeder designs, if you get certified from them, they have to undergo these 13 different tests. Let us not go into details. Google can give you so many details about 61439 now. And 61439 certified panels, if you have, then apart from procuring a type tested switchgear, you also procure a kind of type tested design, I would say, which will ensure safety, because during energy management, whenever I tell people that energy efficient product, if it is not put inside an energy efficient system, you don't get benefit. Something like this, it happens here also. Suppose I have a type tested breaker, and if I keep side clearance less than what is recommended, then that type tested breaker also can fail because of flashovers. So this design ensures all that. And 6149 has lot of provisions. I mean, it makes the panel manufacturer study the site conditions first. There are a lot of forms available in this standard. So he has to take down what is the humidity, is there any corrosive atmosphere at the site. All that he has to tabulate and then design the panel. So 6149, according to my experience, it is definitely a helpful standard. And as and when we start, many of us start using it, probably the premium on the price also can go down. If number of manufacturers increase, the premium on the price also can definitely go down. As of now, it is slightly available at premium this thing, but it definitely can go down once the use increases. These panels will house type-tested switchgears and other components in a type-tested panel design and will ensure more safety. Testing is available in India and few panel manufacturers have completed the testing. So I would recommend all of you to at least check what would be the price for your next purchase if the manufacturer you select who is IEC 61439 certified manufacturer. Another very funny thing which I would like to discuss in this webinar is last mile loads, and I'll give you an incident. Recently, we conducted audit in a Pune-based large MNC, where why that safety audit was initiated. Basically, because their MD had a conference room outside his cabin, and the projector incoming mains cord got burnt in front of his eyes when there was a conference going on. There was some problem created in the projector, and it got reflected into burning of the mains cord. Nothing tripped on the way, and the entire mains cord burnt. So that was the incident which actually gave us business for electrical safety audit. So that probably can throw some light on what happens with the MCBs especially I am talking about, not MCCBs, which you use on last mile circuits. So all of them we select based on C curve or D curve or whatever. So those breakers are supposed to trip at a particular current. Now, whenever there is a short circuit, overload, let us forget. Let's talk about short circuit. If there is any short circuit at the end, at least at that time it should trip. Now, the current for which it is supposed to trip, we very rarely calculate whether that current will be available in that short circuit. The last mile wires, definitely the cross section will go. You have, let's say, 2.5 MVA transformer to a MCC, then a PCC, then maybe a MLDB, then there will be a small DB near the conference room, and then the last mile cable will go to particular project. So any cable in between, if you select just because you know that the load is less, and if you select the cable only for load current, then lesser the diameter of the cable, more is the resistance. And even if you short circuit, your current passing through that short circuit is not enough to trip the breaker. And in that case, the cable gets overheated, and because of that, the cable burns. This happens at so many places. It can happen. I mean, if there is a short circuit, I have just given you an example here. We have a circuit here where the last mile load is only 500 watts, and initially it was supplied through 1.5 square mm cable. The current available under short circuit was 35 amperes. Whereas if I change this cable from 1.5 to 2.5, the current goes to 52 amperes. So you can see the difference just by changing the cable from 1.5 to 2.5. It might so happen that if the breaker can trip at 50 amperes, then it will not trip here, even if there is a short circuit. So while calculating this, the software has taken care of resistance of this cable as well, because of 1.5 square mm. Now here if you see NBC and NEC, National Building Code says that in any commercial establishments or office premises, the last mile electrical distribution cable should not be less than 2.5 square mm. Such restrictions are there in that National Building Code. So if you follow them, naturally you will follow this knowingly or unknowingly, and things can be better. Such coordination is never done presently in India in many places. I mean, breakers are selected well, but the contractor ultimately says that itna hi load hai, chota cable lagaya to chalega. all that ultimately can create this kind of a situation, and this can happen at so many places. To give you an example, again I'll refer to the finance company from US who has a lot of offices in Pune. They give us work every 6 months, and we in 48 hours we are expected to give them a report on about 2000 MCBs. We have to physically inject the current, trip those breakers, and give them a report that this breaker trips at this current at within so much of time. So, that kind of a commitment is required to maintain electrical safety. So once, if it is not designed properly, I mean, another company, I can even take a name. There was a office supposed to come up in Pune for Rolls-Royce, well-known car manufacturing company. They wanted to have an office in Pune, and they rejected 2-3 premises, basically because the electrical design, they wanted a rented place. Premises were ready. So when they checked with the electrical designs, they found all these lapses. And they said to the landlord that unless or until you change all this, we'll not be able to use your premises. So people take that much of care. Another thing which you can understand here is probably at the design stage and the project execution stage, whatever changes I am trying to show here will not cost much compared to the total electrical establishment cost. But definitely they will convert the establishment into a more safe scenario. So all this care one needs to take, one has to take. Now let us go to earthing. Now statistics shows that more than 70% faults in electrical systems are earth faults. So actually you are expected to give a protection for earth faults in a much better way. Actual earth fault current once known, the trip setting can be arranged accordingly. Whenever an earth fault occurs, the system voltage gets divided. If you can imagine a circuit in front of you, there is a voltage source, there is a source impedance, then there is an impedance from source impedance to earth, and then the return comes back against to source. So whenever a short circuit happens, obviously load is almost bypassed. Short circuit impedance is much less compared to the load. So the entire voltage gets divided between earth resistance and source impedance. So if a person standing on earth touches top part of the earth resistance, then the voltage which he experiences is known as touch potential. So that should be within limits so that he doesn't get a shock. So this is the base of any earthing system design. In order to keep this touch potential within limit, depending upon soil resistivity, one has to decide total number of earth pits required at any site. Earthing itself can be a 2 hours webinar or even a 1 full day webinar. So we'll not go into details of this, but the basic points are this: that how many number of earth pits you should have starts from short circuit current. Next is what is your soil resistivity. Third is what are the standards related to touch potential. Based on that, these earth pits are supposed to be created. Then one should know that getting earth pit resistance less than 1 ohm is a myth. I mean, you just cannot get less than 1 ohm at every place. So that tells you, depending upon soil resistivity, how many earth pits you should have. Added to that, there are some statutory. Hello? Hello?
Yeah, you're audible. You can go ahead.
Okay. The rest of the earth grid should be strong enough to carry fault current before it gets disconnected by monitoring relays and circuit breakers. Whenever a earth fault current flows, obviously, ultimately, a breaker has to operate to disconnect the source from that fault. Otherwise, the fault current will never stop until it gets clear. Your entire earthing system should carry it without getting damaged. I mean, that decides what earthing cable or GI strip size you are expected to use. So all this probably can be checked, rather decided at the time of design for ensuring this safety. Otherwise, having only one good earth pit and wherever it is there, that doesn't really help you to clear and get maximum benefit of earthing. Good earthing also brings a reference point for phase voltages and keeps phase voltages more or less same even if imbalance loading. So this is also another reason you should have good earthing. We are not talking about power quality issues related to earthing in this webinar, because that's again a totally different issue. But from safety side, at least these things have to be ensured. Now what remains is lightning protection. India had another standard till recently. Now again the standard has changed. It is IS/IEC 62305. This recently introduced LPS standard and supersedes all earlier standards. Now even in India, this is the only standard recognized by NBC, National Building Code. This standard cares for direct strikes of lightning, strikes on utility lines. So these are new things in the standard. Suppose I have a MSEDCL line coming inside my plant. I am a remotely located plant, and I have, let's say, a 10-kilometer line coming to my overhead line coming to my premises. And if a lightning strikes at the other end of the transmission line, maybe 10 kilometers from my place, being a conductor in between, lot of jolt can still come to my plant. So this standard takes care of that as well. Now it doesn't talk only about impact of lightning on the building or something like that. Then utility lines, it even talks about communication lines. These days, for all industries, OFC line is a very common thing, for data communication and all. So it takes care of a lightning strike on communication lines as well. Suggests protection system design based on all these three possibilities. It gives separate treatment for protecting critical electronic loads like data centers, SCADA, and using SPDs. I mean, basically, the standard talks about a risk assessment. The designer has to sit with the property owner and decide what exactly he wants to cover, and based on that risk assessment, whatever he wants to cover can be covered and a good design can be made, and it describes detailed LPS design procedure. So based on this, the standard also works. Again, IC 62305 is a 650 pages standard, so much cannot be covered under general subject of electrical safety. But this is a standard which is now recognized by lot of insurance agencies as well. As far as lightning is concerned, one more thing which I would like to mention here, which is not mentioned in my slide, is there was a another concept which is why was it even exists today. Early streamer type of lightning protection system was introduced by some agencies in India as well as worldwide. Let's not go into detail how it works, but now the 62305 says that even if you have installed an early streamer type of lightning protection device, it will be considered only as a single air terminal. So early streamer lightning protection system may cost you about 1.5 lakhs or 2 lakhs, and an air terminal will cost you 1500 rupees. So this, as far as standard goes, they take it only as air terminal. So that is the difference. Now coming to, after all this, I have already mentioned that a third-party safety audit helps you in getting the good results as far as electrical safety is concerned. I have tried to discuss here a generic scope, not related to a particular establishment. But comprehensive electrical safety audits are recommended once in 5 years. Are these audits mandatory? As of today in India, no, they are not mandatory. You are not supposed to get the things audited because auditors themselves are not certified as of now. So it is not mandatory, but it's a good practice to get it audited. So you can do it either once in 5 years, a comprehensive audit, or whenever any major change in the plant electrical system is implemented, either expansion or shifting or something like that. At that time also you can do this. Such audits should focus more on collecting actual site data related to installed equipment capacity, measurements, and of actual loading. This should be validated with each other to know capacity utilization, factor of safety. Most of the time we see that electrical audits are done only as a physical survey. I mean, a person will come to your establishment with a notebook and a pen with some gray hairs on his head. So he will roam around in the factory. Whatever he feels bad, he will write down. That will give you as a recommendation. And most of the time rest of the time we will spend on checking your documentation. Documentation needs to be checked, but only by having a certified SLD from electrical inspector in your file doesn't mean that you have a safe electrical system, typically in Indian scenario. So all this physical data collection and recording of data and all that, if one does a capacity validation also, you are bound to get more confidence on your system. Statutory documentation, periodic submission of reports and approval should be checked during the audit. Understand safety SOPs in the plant, interview staff to assess their understanding. This also can be covered into audit. Thermal imaging of electrical equipment to detect hotspots. I'll just mention here one more thing. As far as thermal imaging is concerned, most of the time we see the reports of thermography actually include a hotspot reporting. Temperature is more than 100 degrees, temperature is more than 80 degrees, 90 degrees, and things like that. Actually, thermography should be used to see any temperature above 80-90 degrees in any electrical panel can visibly be also, you can see it visibly. No need of any thermal camera for that, because most of the time you see the insulation of the cable or the sleeve on the top is melted, and all that is very easily you can recognize it. But suppose I have a feeder where I know that the load is a three-phase induction motor and the currents are reasonably balanced, and still I get one temperature about 45 degrees and another temperature about 65 degrees. Another contact, I mean, there are three contacts for a NCB or a starter incomer as well as outgoing. If I see a difference of 10 to 15 degrees in two adjacent phases, then I definitely have a chance to say that the second, which is at higher temperature, is loose. So that becomes a kind of a predictive maintenance. So such predictive maintenance can be implemented in these audits, which really hints you to take some precaution well in advance, rather than attending only a 100 or 200 degrees. I mean, that you have to do anyway. But the tags should be generated out of thermography which are related to loose contacts. Now, for detecting them, obviously you need slightly higher specification camera, because zoom facility has to be there, and its sensor also has to be good. So all that costs something. So just by appointing a thermographer on a daily basis and sending a person behind him for taking photographs of various panels and feeders and creating a record actually doesn't give you a real advantage of thermography. So this also can be considered when you offload such work. Preparing digital twin of plant electrical system using electrical system simulation software, generate intelligent electrical documentation using this twin. This also can be a part of audit, so that you have a better understanding of your system, better record of your system, and can be referred to for any further use. Run load flow, short circuit analysis, check relay coordination with existing settings, recommend safer settings and modifications if any, better coordination for better coordination and safety. Checking switchgear cable testing record if available, that also can be checked. Check soil resistivity and earth pit resistance, understand earthing system. See, CA2010 also tells you how your earth pit should look from outside as well as inside. I mean, they insist that you should have a 2.5 by 2.5 feet chamber with accessibility to join between earthing strip and the earthing electrode. So accessibility, by accessibility, what they mean is it should be easily disconnecting facility, rather possibility must be there. So once you do that, you really come to know about what is the soil earth pit resistance. Otherwise, 10 earth pits, if you parallel, if 9 are not good, only 1 is good. As per parallel resistance law, the grid resistance will be lesser than the least. So whenever actual fault current comes, it will try to flow only through, maximum of it will be diverted to one particular pit, and the electrode can melt there. So this actual earth pit testing is also equally important. Last mile physical inspection of electrical installations to know workmanship issues, excessive heating, this also needs to be included into that. Checking provisions of electrical safety requirements as per CA2010 regulations. See, if you go through these regulations, they have specified so many things. Clearance from wall to panel, clearance from door to all that is specified there. So whenever such audit is done, actually layout should be made, and whenever possible, the modifications also should be done. All of that makes sense. CA2010 is lengthy, but it is written very cleverly. All precautions are existing there. Collecting photographic evidence of all non-compliances, perform arc flash analysis and recommend system changes to reduce the hazards, prepare a clearly executable to-do list with priorities marked as ABC. This also one can insist on a safety audit, so that you get a executable to-do list. Nothing is subjective. Everything should be objective. Change this, change that, or set this, set that. All such kind of instructions, if you get as output of such an audit, then your responsibility is just to go through that list and take compliance of everything at the end. That gives you more than safe environment. So this is what actually I wanted to share. Abhijit?
Yeah. We have some questions coming up in the chat, which I would like to address one after the other. So can we start now? I guess, yeah. Is there any defined life period for any electrical equipment?
Actually, we handled this question in our last webinar as well. See, basically, any electrical system, if you take, it's a integration of so many individual components, right? And their use is always dependent on. I'll give you a small example here. If I buy a car and if I use it only 10 kilometers a day, we had a professor in our society staying using a Maruti car which was manufactured in first 50,000 Marutis, because his travel was hardly 10 kilometers a day. So he could use it for 25-30 years. That is as far as use is concerned. Second thing is use or misuse. Even that will decide life of electrical equipment. It will also depend upon the atmosphere in which you are using it. We have few clients in chemical zones in India where in few plants the ambient there is so much corrosive that unless and until a filtered air is given to electrical panels, they can go bad. So it is very difficult to say life, but on an average, a well-maintained and a type-tested electrical equipment should last for, let's say, somewhere between 15 to 20, 20 to 25 years.
Okay. Why is overcapacity equipment unsafe or design unsafe? I would think that is the question.
See, overcapacity equipment, if it doesn't have facility, I'll give you an example. Suppose you have a transformer with a secondary side relay, and your relay, just because the breaker is bigger and the load was not known, if somebody puts a 5000 by 5 CT there, and the current never crosses 1000 amperes, then the CT linearity and everything comes into picture. And actual trip, and on top of that, suppose you set, just because your transformer is rated for 5000 amperes, if you set the breaker to trip beyond 5000 amperes, then your abnormal overloads or within plant, whatever happens, will not be taken care of by that relay at all. So unless there is a dead short circuit, that relay and the whole arrangement is not really useful to you. And under such circumstances, when we audit sites, people normally say that nothing trips in our plant for years together. Now, basically, it will never trip because it is not set to trip for your current load. So it is not always recommended practice that settings are set for maximum capacity. They also are expected to take care of your current loads as well. So for that, either you need a modularity or you need initial change in specifications of at least sensing. If a 5000 ampere breaker, if you decide to trip for at 2000 amperes with good CT linearity for initial 2-3 years, nothing will happen to the transformer, but you will get more protection.
This is another question: how the industry maintenance personnel like engineers and ITI technicians get certified for carrying out maintenance work? Is there any procedure?
See, as of now, apart from a certified supervisor and electrical this thing, I mean, that's the only thing where you can get certified. As far as breakers and HP and LT, main high current switchgear and high power switchgear is concerned, individual companies give training and they certify electricians. So they have certain norms. I mean, either it has to be ITI electrical or something. and then they train for their equipment, and then you can say that this particular person is certified for maintenance of ABC make off breaker or something like that. So otherwise there is no government certification for a maintenance person as such.
What is the general understanding when we say that it's a 500 MVA SC? It was basically
What
in
is
the
the
ATAP
general?
simulation. Yeah. What is
See,
the general?
500 MVA SC clearly means that 500 into 10 raised to 6 equal to root 3 into your system voltage into ISC. So what is the short circuit capacity? What is maximum short circuit capacity that grid can deliver? Short circuit current which that grid can deliver at rated voltage. That is what is given by 500 MVA SC.
Is there any PPE that complies to NFPA 70E electrical safety code?
See, NFPA 70E talks about PPs as far as arc flash is concerned. There are different energy levels, and a typical arc flash analysis program will give you different PPs for different arc flashes. So that's what they say. As far as shock protection is concerned, as far according to NFP 70, again there are tables available in 70 NFP 70 which tells you which type of gloves you should wear, what capacity, what voltage rated gloves you should use, what you should wear when working on electrical systems. All that is, there are tables available in NFP 70. We can maybe share with them offline.
Surely. Can you provide some names of electrical system simulation softwares?
There is a software called PSCAD. There is a software called ETAP. Now, incidentally, as SAS Powertech, we are licensed users of ETAP. So, the SKM, there are 2-3 different softwares available which are used worldwide. What has happened is, particularly ETAP is from USA, and it is well accepted, and probably that was the first software. It started in 1983. So it has a very wide acceptance in world. And second thing is, it has lot of representation. ETAP as a company has lot of representation in various IC and IEEE committees. So we are using it. There are 2-3 softwares.
Yeah.
Only advice to prospective users would be, see, it is something like this, that any software use actually needs lot of practice. So at maintenance level, if you decide to use this software, then a lot of practice is required. So I'm not trying to advertise my services given by my company, but it is always better to take this. If you are a working individual for plant maintenance, then it's better to take this service from outside. Few companies who have huge setups for captive generation and all, they have bought these softwares. They do it internally also.
There's a query, there's a humming issue in transformer LT side bus bars, 6000 amperes, 150 into 10 into 4 numbers, aluminum each phase. What can be probable reasons?
What was the question? I understood about 6,000 amps. What was the question?
There is a humming issue in transformer LT side
Humming
bus
issue.
bars. Yeah.
Okay. Basically, what happens is, if in any electrical system, whenever it is carrying current, it generates electromagnetic forces as well. Now, normally the systems are designed to carry 50 hertz currents. So whenever your currents are rich of harmonics, what is harmonics? Harmonics is actually a high frequency electric current. So if your loads are non-linear, then it is possible that your transformer secondary current has a lot of harmonics, maybe either because of only non-linear loads or because of the resonance happening there due to only capacitors used for power factor correction, and that generates some electromagnetic forces which the system is not designed for. And because of attraction and repulsion of different bus bars, gradually your nut bolt starts becoming loose. or maybe it can even, the forces can even attract the external metal enclosure of your LT panel, and then the whole thing generates harmonic noise. You might have observed that whenever your load is at peak, that noise must be more, and whenever the load is less, that noise becomes less. So you'll have to get the basically harmonic analysis done properly to rule out 90% chances are it is because of harmonics.
A problem faced by one of our members is frequent busting of flame-proof well glass fittings. That is a glass burst. In that case, they have observed that the capacitor failure is the reason. Can you help us understand or resolve?
There could be possibility. I mean, we have attended this problem somewhere else where I'll tell you what we found there. Maybe in your case, the problem could be slightly different. The well glass fittings, whatever starters you use, if they are not harmonic compensated, then there is a possibility of large third harmonic current flowing through your system and generating some amount of third harmonic voltage as well. So these third harmonic voltages, if they are applied to capacitors, those capacitors which are inside, overheating is always possible, and because of that they must be bursting. So this is one of the reasons. Other reason could be simply the design is such a way that whatever heat is produced cannot be dissipated inside. I mean, the design heat dissipation design itself is wrong. Or a third reason could be you have sustained over voltages in the plant.
Some participant is facing a force voltage imbalance problem. This arises typically when load rises from 250 amperes to 1000 amperes. The bus bar is designed for 5000 amperes.
And what is the issue? Voltage?
Yeah, for phase voltage imbalance problem. Typically, when
Phase voltage imbalance, the reason, again, as I said, could be few phases have more harmonics, few phases have less harmonics. That is also possible. Second thing is, although your bus bars are of 5000 ampere rating, you have to take into account the source capacity as well. What is behind the bus bar? Transformer rating, is it, and this 5000 amperes and all, if it is recorded only by panel meters, then actual peak currents could be even more than that. They will have to be recorded on the analyzer, and then we'll come to know what is the actual peak current handled by transformer or whatever infrastructure behind the bus bar. Based on that, probably voltage imbalance can be explained.
Another question: can you create a new earthquake map of the entire plant, including substation and MCC, if no drawings or data of connectivity of existing earthquakes is accurately available?
Definitely, the entire earthing system. I mean, wherever we do audits after say 20-25 years of plant operation, we revamp entire earthing system in the plant. It is possible. Slight calculations as far as soil resistivity and other things are concerned will be slightly approximate. Basically, because once the plant is running, you will have a lot of other metallic things passing through the ground. So soil resistivity readings may be slightly wrong, but still the entire earthing system can again be redesigned and proper earthing can be done. In fact, we have executed about 8-10 such projects as well so far.
This query is in regards to earthing. There are 4 earth pits that are supporting a connected load for 1200 kilowatt, and operating load is 80% of capacity load. If resistance comes to less than 3 ohm, is it sufficient, or is there any other standard to verify that?
See, basically, any earthing for assessing adequacy of earthing, loading is absolutely not a criteria which should be referred. I mean, let us understand one thing, that earthing adequacy has got something to do with short circuit currents under earth fault. So assessing adequacy of earthing based on load is not a correct process. Fundamentally, we should know what is the fault current possibility there, which will bypass the load. See, any fault actually is a least resistance path compared to your load. So 95% of the current will pass through fault, only 5% may pass through your load at whenever the fault occurs. So if you want to assess adequacy of earthing, your earthing earth fault current should be assessed. Based on that, we can tell whether those earth pits are sufficient or not.
Nowadays, mesh of earth pits is recommended instead of individual earth pits. In this case, whether it is safe for instrumentation panels to have common earth with LV electrical installations.
Yeah, as I was discussing, basically the electrical or electronic noise related earthing provisions we have not discussed here. But to give you a proper this thing, maybe what actually happens is your instrumentation suppliers or maybe the data equipment related suppliers, they insist on a dedicated earth pit. Now, a dedicated earth pit should be provided to them if they have a dedicated data earth inside their panel. There are two types of earthings which are possible in such sensitive equipment. Data earth can definitely be connected to a separate earth pit. But again, on that, if they insist on a earth pit resistance less than 1 ohm, then it is not possible to get it within one or two different one or two earth pits. So question comes again whether it should be connected to the grid. So a dedicated earth pit given for instrumentation will definitely ensure that the related earth current can go only to those dedicated earth pits. But to bring down the earth pit resistance, ultimately we'll have to connect them to the grid. Details, I think we can take offline with them. I mean, we can discuss with them. It's a slightly bigger subject.
Okay. How to prepare a safety SOP? Are there any guidelines for it?
Lot of basic precautions are all known, right? You should keep the electrical panel clean. You should keep all screws and screw connections and bolt connections tied to a particular limit. Now, if you are enthusiastic enough, you can even put torque limitations on that. I'll give you a small example. And we had done some project in China about 3 years back. And we saw that when we asked for 3 teams from our customer, electrician teams for doing work for us, all of them had come with a toolkit which had a torque limited screwdrivers and spanners and everything. So whenever we gave them BOQ, they made us to put torque requirement in front of each task. So all these things you can put into the SOP. Apart from this, I normally say that something related to functionality also there is no standard norm. Let me tell you, there is no standard norm or standard procedure available. All multinationals, they come out with a more things encompassing safety manuals, in which some generic terms are written from NFP 70 and other local standards and all that. And ultimately, a person who is maintaining a particular set of panels has to generate his own SOP. So apart from these standard procedures, if they are available, you can put them into your SOP. And something related to functionality of the panel also you can add. I'll give you a small example. We had done some audit in BKC of a huge commercial building. Now they had generators, DG backup and everything, because all Forex banks were existing. And actually the SOP of main LT panel for a particular transformer, main breaker of a particular transformer feeder, what was written in the SOP? It was written in the SOP that open the panel, clean it with blower, see that the screws are tight, and just shut it down. This is all that was written in the SOP. Actually, there was a sensor contactor sitting in the same feeder, which was sensing whether mains is on or off, rather utility supply is on or off, and it was giving a signal to the DG panel to start it. So maybe we suggested that please add this also into it, because when we tried to test auto DG on, somebody has to run to that particular feeder and short one contact. Only then actually the DG started. So functionality also you can add. Now this functionality is required. It is safer. No? I mean, you get a signal physically from on the panel which tells you that the supply is no more there, and then you start the DG. So it becomes a kind of an interlock. So such functionality also you can add into those SOPs and then make proper SOPs.
In thermal imaging, please explain meaning and TO meaning and what is higher temperature limit? What is the higher temperature limit? Is there any defined SOP?
See, actually, higher temperature limits upon what you are thermographing. And if you are doing something on a cable, maybe 80, 85 degrees is the maximum temperature you can reach. It will depend upon temperature limits decided by the equipment for which you are doing thermography rather than thermography having its own standard. Generally, in electrical panels, we recommend that anything above 70, 75 is not done. And 70, 75 also, suppose, as I was explaining, if you have three contacts in the same ambient condition, if one contact is at 45 degrees and another is at 75 degrees, then all three can remain at 45. So that should be your aim, that the lowest in three should be the standard temperature for all the rest of them.
Hello, sir.
Yeah.
Hello.
Hello. Yes.
Can you send us the PPT?
Yeah, we can certainly do that.
Actually,
There's another question. Hello. Dwivedi sir? Yeah. How much safe distance one should maintain from transformers? What should be the safe distance of fence from transformer? And what is the safe distance of keeping fire extinguisher from the transformer?
Apart from fire extinguisher, rest of the things are specified in the standard. So whatever is given in Indian standards, they are all available. I mean, we'll give them those details offline. But these clearance from ground for different voltages, clearance from fans, how much should be the distance between two transformers, which above which capacity you should have oil sump for the transformers, all that is specified. So we'll give them the respective standard number and they can go through. Fire extinguishers, obviously, I mean, they should be at approachable distance when a problem arises. So it will again depend upon geometry. I don't think there is a standard for which tells you that at what distance the fire extinguisher should be there. And these days you get so many types of fire extinguishers for typically for transformers. So they will, the distance according to me is not specified. I'll check and get back. But rest of the things definitely will give them a standard. Take it down, their name and email. We'll give them which standard they can refer for rest of the things.
Yeah. Is the internal safety officer held responsible for any electrical incidents as per CA 2010 or as per CA?
Yeah, actually, the law as of now says that he will be responsible. But as I said, so far none of the inspectors have given letter to a safety officer. As far as my knowledge goes, maybe people might have a different experience as well. That yes, we are accepting this person as a safety officer. So unless or until he is an approved safety officer by electrical inspector, I think he cannot be held responsible.
Okay.
But once he is approved, he will be responsible. Responsible to the extent of keeping periodic records. Please ensure this. I mean, if your SOP and the law says that once in a year you have to fill up that form, and genuine effort, if the inspector sees that you have really done it, but it has happened either because of overconfidence of the operator or because of some another thing, that some mechanical thing, let's say, fall on a electrical panel and because of that something happened, then he will not be held responsible. If he is found to create documents when the incident happens, then maybe he will be responsible for that. So it's a limited responsibility. It's not that if he's taken the responsibility, if anything happens, he will be responsible.
Okay. Any questions?
Again, to tell you frankly, legal, if they are coming from a corporate outside company, the legal opinion will be more important than what I say. Because
Just a minute, I'm just searching for if there is any question that has been left unanswered, so that we can conclude. Just a minute. There is some question here. Who is authorized electrical engineer related to energy ENMS?
what is the meaning? I don't understand.
Energy
If you are talking
management
about
system, it seems like it. Who is an
if you are
authorized?
talking about ISO 50001, then ISO 50001 can have its own MR, right? Management representative. If you are talking about ENMS, ENMS is a popular word for
Energy management.
ISO 50001, which is Energy Management Standard. I am a certified lead auditor for that. So there is nothing like a certified engineer for ENMS. All these BVQI and TUV and all these companies, they keep conducting seminars of 3 days to 5 days explaining you details about 50001. And if you pay their fees, probably they conduct some examinations at the end of those training programs, and then they are authorized to give you a certificate that you are a authorized lead auditor for 50001 or lead trainer for 50001 or something like that. Whereas within factory, if you are from an implementation side, then it's a standard ISO practice. You will have to appoint one MR. Generally, ENMS says that the MR can also be from outside, but he should be an energy professional. I mean, typical other ISO standards, I mean, quality standard and all, can also accept a non-engineer MR or lead for that audit team. But energy being a basic functionality related to engineering, it is written in the standard that lead should be an engineer.
Can a substation fence be connected to a body earth of any equipment like transformer body?
According to me, both should be independently earthed. The earth grid could be common for both, but what is the point in connecting fence and transformer? Because you will anyway have to have, whenever it's a big transformer, in the sense HT280 normal transformer, there are norms how many earth pits you should have for body earth, for neutral earth, and so on and so forth. And depending upon soil resistivity, you will get a design as to how many number of earth pits should be there. So you can as well use that earth grid for earthing your fence. If it's a HT to MV transformer, then I'll have to get back with exact details. But I think even the fencing earthing is also recommended. If it's say 132 by 11 or 66 by 11 or such big transformer, then there are norms for earthing the fencing as well.
Does intelligent electrical documentation help to comply to safety standards?
Definitely. I mean, the moment you have all those calculations made, you have reason for every act what you are doing in actual implementation. And at least as far as ETAP is concerned, what I know is every calculation is done based on some standard. So if I do short circuit analysis using ETAP, it is done to comply with IEC 60909. If I do arc flash, it is done to comply with IEEE 1584. So the results and recommendations which come out of that study and documentation are guiding you to adhere to a particular standard. So you can say that if you do it to follow those guidelines, you are complying to those standards.
What is
even for even capacity assessment, it follows the standard. So if you have a cable which is recommended by say ETAP cable sizing, then it is adhering to that standard.
What is the life of Ashlock type earthing?
See, the manufacturers talk about 30 years. Now, since that technology has come in the market, 30 years have not passed. So, I will not comment on that. I don't know how much life it will give, but definitely that the whole chemical earthing. Let us talk about chemical earthing, not about astrocartography. Total chemical earthing concept is obviously much pipe chemical earthing type of earthing is much better than plate type earthing in any kind of environment, because the fragile things are comparatively very less. In earlier plate type earthing, plate to pit electrode connection was a weak point which used to get damaged maybe within 4 or 5 years in normal conditions, and maybe 2 3 years in a marshy land or salt land and corroding type of atmosphere and heavy raining areas and all that. So compared to that, this earthing is definitely better.
What is the minimum distance should be kept between a lightning or arrestor earth pit and equipment earth pit?
Actually, standard says you can make a common earthing grid also for both of them. If both are designed properly, then touch potentials are not different. So nothing will happen even if you parallel them. But they also say that if you can keep it, I mean, it doesn't say that you can keep it different, but if you keep it different, I mean, again, if both are designed properly, then whatever minimum we say, depth equal to length, I mean, whatever deep you go, at least that much distance should be there between two earth pits. If you have 3 meters earth pits, then the distance between two earth pits must be 3 meters.
Is electrical safety audit helps in to reduce insurance premium?
Definitely.
Okay. Instead of insulating mats, some floor insulating paints are being used. Does this provide the same precaution, so the same safety? I
Yes,
guess.
only thing is you are supposed to take test certificates from them and keep it on record.
Okay. Is fence earthing required for 22 kV by 440 volt substation?
Yes, for any transformer fence, you should do earthing. No? What is harm? You can connect it to the earth grid created in and around your plant. See, the main problem is, suppose let us say you have an open type of transformer substation where from your two pole structure, if the cables are coming directly to transformer primary bushing, and if anything happens and there is a breakage in those cables coming from, or maybe incoming line which is terminated on the two pole structure, if it by something it falls on your fence, then it is better if you have earthed it properly.
Yeah. What
Again, as far as all these things are concerned, let me explain it once again that depending upon soil resistivity and available earth fault currents and statutory requirements. These are three inputs to a earthing system design system. One is soil resistivity, second is fault current, and third is statutory requirements. All these three put together, let's say, go into a black box, and what comes out is how many earth pits you should have, and then depending upon your layout, you can lay them wherever it is convenient. The first criteria in laying these earth pits would be go to load centers as far as possible and power centers as far as possible. So you can suppose you have a main LT panel in one room. Out of all minimum to maximum four or three or four earth pits you can have near to that room, and based on that the layout is prepared.
Okay. What is the impact of harmonics on electronic cards? What is limit of current and voltage harmonic? And how to detect electronic card failure due to harmonics?
Yeah, detailed power quality audit is required for that in any case. Most of the time, if your harmonics are creating voltage distortion in your premises, I mean, they are large enough to disturb the voltage waveforms also, then that is one diagnostic thing which I can tell, which can definitely tell that it is happening because of that. Second thing is digital electronics can get damaged because of induced, one part of going this harmonic related noise into electronic equipment is conducted noise. Another part is non-conducted, but it is kind of transmitted. I mean, suppose you have a sensor cable of a VFD going in vicinity of a power cable of the same VFD, then obviously there being large DI/dt going on through power cables, varying magnetic flux is created which links your sensor cables, and then those additional voltages can enter into an electronic card, which definitely can get damaged. So there are standards, there are very close studies required for doing that. And in such kind of scenario, actually most of the time all stakeholders have to be taken into account, and their commitments to each other also comes into picture. Generally what happens is, in a typical scenario, suppose you have bought a large CNC machine costing about 8-10 crores, then there is a tendency to believe in that vendor more than all other vendors. So if he says there are harmonics, immediately you go and start talking about harmonics. I'll give a small example for this. I mean, some place we had attended a grinding machine, centralized grinding machine, where they had a magnetic chuck for that grinding machine, and the job used to fall suddenly in between, without any. There was no logic why the job used to fall down. And the manufacturer who had come all the way from Italy for that machine, he also was telling that this is happening because of harmonics. And ultimately, we found that the cable which was coming to that particular machine from the transformer end, one phase in that transformer box was loose, and because of some other load getting on in the plant adjacent to this particular feeder, there was a voltage dip, and because of that, that job was failing. So just by tightening that cable, we had to struggle. I am telling you in 2 minutes, we had to struggle for about 2-3 days to locate the problem, but this was the problem. So any failure, if it is abruptly or without proper analysis, if it is getting related to harmonics, the reason may be harmonics, may not be harmonics. So it becomes a typical kind of a root cause analysis problem, which at SAS we take up such jobs, and we have some rate contracts also with big companies for attending to such jobs.
Yeah.
Another misconcept in this, let me talk about that also, that people try to apply IEEE 519, 1992 at so many places in the plant when this happens. Whereas IEEE 519, 1992 is a standard which is applicable only at point of common coupling between utility and plant. So it is going to take care of only these two stakeholders. You cannot say that IEEE 519, 1992 is applicable at one of the machine inputs.
Yeah.
So there are different techniques which will probably lead to finding out a root cause and suggest a solution.
Is it necessary to replace transformer oil every year? And if yes, then why?
Definitely not every year. If you are, see, there are actually I missed that in the total presentation. Good that this question has come. Normally, transformer oil needs to be filtered every year, not replaced. Filtered every year because the transformer gets exposed to all environmental conditions, and it's a fossil oil, so sludge formation and all that is possible. After about 2 to 3 years of working of transformer, I would recommend, instead of replacing the oil, while just before oil filtration, you can get two more tests done, which one is known as DGA analysis, dissolved gas analysis, and another is Furon test. So these two tests, if you do, you actually come to know about what kind of probable fault can come inside the transformer, and what is the general status of solid insulation used in your transformer. So without dismantling the transformer, these two guidelines, if you keep logging every 3 years, if you keep these Furon and DGA figures in a table and draw a graph, if they are on increasing side, there are standards attached to both these tests. There are IS standards attached to both these tests, as well as the test for transformer oil filtration. So these three tracks, if you keep with a good record with you, maybe you yourself will get a hint when the replacement is required, but definitely not in 1 year. But every year you are supposed to get it filtered.
How can How can intelligent documentation be updated easily? Is it necessary to collect all data for any change?
See, eventually, once the documentation is created, fundamentally what is required is it has to be a faithful information transfer between user and the person who is creating that. If he confidently tells that these are the only three changes I have done, then only those changes can be incorporated. Not necessary that everything should be done again.
What does ESD stand for, and what is the difference between ESD conductive material?
I'll have to get back on this. I don't know. Let me be very frank.
Okay, fine. Thanks for this question because we'll search something about it now. I think it should be something related to electrostatic, but let us not comment on it. We'll look at
Let us study and we'll answer that.
Jivan Gade. Yeah, we'll get back to you, sir, on this. And
It is electrostatic discharge, but let us see what we can comment on that. I'm not prepared right now.
yeah. Anyways, I guess the questions are over, and I hope it was informative for all of you, and you could gather some more information than you actually had about this topic. We at SAS Biotech would be of great help if you are willing to conduct these kind of electrical safety audits for your facilities. These will be unbiased and very realistic with transparent findings of what the situation is. And usually we intend to ensure that the safety standard of that facility is enhanced as well as the compliance standards that are there. At least the compliance is checked and identified what needs to be done for compliances. So allow us to connect with you for any of your queries. The link that was sent to you for the webinar joining in, you can reply to that with your queries, or if you're interested to know more about what we can do for your facilities, uptime enhancement, and safety enhancement, please get in touch with us. We are more than happy to help you across India, outside India, maybe the Middle East or your Southeast Asian countries. We are currently having live projects with all these in all these locations. I thank you all for investing your time in this webinar and getting connected and being patient to listening all the queries and answers. And we'll certainly come up with some similarly interesting and informative webinars in the time to come. Because per se visits are not possible now for some time at least, and hope you all are safe and stay safe, and we'll get connected soon again on some similarly important and topic for sure. Thank you once again. Thanks.